Why are you passing me on the shoulder? What gives you the right to get to your destination before me? Hey, that guy ran a red light and nearly clipped me. Where are the cops? Why are they never around when somebody runs a red? Hey, that spot was mine. You saw me waiting here. I've been circling this lot for 20 minutes. You just got here. I feel like we've all been here, right? We've all had a moment on the road where we momentarily saw red over some slight from another driver, and I'd like to think that the majority of us have never escalated a situation into something dangerous. We just feel the anger, we feel our nerves sharpen and our blood pressure spike, but we keep focused. We let it pass, and if there's any bitterness left over, we'll just chew on it once we get home. But not everybody lets things slide. Sometimes anger does escalate into road rage. And I'm not talking about lowering your window to curse or flipping somebody off. Enraged drivers have done everything from running cars off the road to following people home, right down to pulling a weapon and leaving another motorist injured or worse. More people than any of us can count have lost their lives to road rage, while others have found themselves behind bars over actions they feel road rage compelled them to take. So why does this happen? What is it about the road that amplifies our aggression and warps our perception of other people? We're going to deconstruct some of the causes for road rage to see how it happens, what's making it worse, and why even the most even-tempered of us isn't completely immune from losing control.
We can rant if we want to. We can send our best regards, 'cause your friends don't rant, and if they don't rant, then they're not into cars.
Somebody get Nate Dogg and Warren G in here, because some of the people out on these hot streets have no loving idea how to regulate. And I know it's easy to say, well, just control yourself, control your emotions. Because emotional regulation can be hard when it feels like somebody has intentionally disrespected you. But also, regulation doesn't necessarily mean just controlling your emotions, but also evaluating them and reconsidering why you're so upset in the first place. And if you can do that, you might recognize that what's causing your road rage is simply a matter of perception. A 2021 study charted the process like this. Okay, so driver A is on his way to a meeting when he's overtaken by driver B. Okay, not great, but whatever. But then, for some reason, driver B now decides to slow down after overtaking driver A. Driver A is stuck behind the guy who passed him. And now his gears are turning, and he's evaluating the situation, and the outcome of that evaluation will determine whether or not this situation escalates. Basically, driver A compares his goal of getting to his meeting on time with his perception that this guy is slowing him down on purpose, and reaches the conclusion that, hey, I'm not going to make it to my meeting on time, and it's that guy's fault. So now driver A is going to start tailgating driver B, looking for an opportunity to get his lick back. Never mind the fact that this sort of behavior is just going to make him even later. Rage doesn't abide by logic. And I feel like this becomes a bigger issue among drivers who tend to feel like every action another driver takes is always about them. And you know exactly who I'm talking about. I'm talking about the type of driver who feels like all the forces of the universe are singularly aligned against them. Because clearly, the universe exists only to mess with a Volkswagen driver who swears that Papasan chairs are comfortable actually, you're just not sitting in them right. Basically, a driver who isn't good at regulating his emotions is less likely to try and view things from the other person's perspective and consider that maybe they made an honest mistake. No, that driver has already sunken into the depths of rage because the insecure workings of his mind are still churning a fresh narrative of perpetual victimhood. The open road is sort of like the internet in that we're all largely anonymous and nobody can really know our motivations unless we're out there broadcasting them. So it's easy to ascribe the worst intentions to somebody's actions on the road, since it's not like the auto industry has gotten around to inventing an apology horn. There'd be a front apology horn for pedestrians that you came perilously close to running over, and then a rear apology horn that's kind of like a fart. It's there to apologize to people that you've just cut off in some way that are now behind you. I really need to patent this. Is anybody in the comments a patent lawyer? I digress. You see, maybe, just maybe, a person who passes you because they think their turn is coming up. But then they slow down when they realize that it's actually not this turn, but the next one. They sped up and then just returned to doing the speed limit. They're not really slowing down specifically to inconvenience you, but an enraged driver will look at that as intentional, targeted disrespect, when the reality is far simpler, that it was just a confused driver in an unfamiliar area. And while, yeah, it's annoying, I don't see any reasonable person arguing that the confused driver deserves to be run off the road by some ill-tempered blowhard who thinks every sedan that overtakes his Land Rover is on its way to rearrange his wife's labial furniture. But it doesn't take much for that seed to take root in the mind of someone with poor regulation. And while you might think these types of drivers are rare, the data would suggest otherwise. A survey by insurance company The Zebra found that roughly 8 out of 10 Americans experience road rage at least once per year, and that 39.2% of men and 28.9% of women have had it directed at them. The Zebra also cited National Highway Traffic Safety Administration data that found that in 2006, just 80 traffic deaths were related to road rage. 9 years later, in 2015, that number jumped to 467, an increase of 500% in under a decade. By 2019, the Zebra's annual survey found that 82% of American drivers admitted to having road rage or driving aggressively at least once in the calendar year, with 7% admitting to getting out of their car to confront the other motorist, 6% admitting that they threw objects, and another 6% admitting to getting physical with another driver. And I have got to believe this was a completely anonymous survey because 5% admitted to sideswiping another vehicle, another 5% admitted to intentionally bumping or ramming another car, and an additional 5% admitted to running another car off the road. In short, some people just don't self-regulate, either because they don't know how or they just don't care to. And this latter driver is the type that will cause the most trouble, because I feel like these are the drivers most likely to be stuck in a perpetual victim mentality. And look, sometimes you are completely justified to be enraged when another driver does something really stupid that causes you an inconvenience or is a close call for your own personal safety. But what I'm saying is that even when they're wrong, it doesn't really help anybody to escalate the situation, at the risk of deploying a well-worn phrase, two wrongs don't make a right, even if three left turns do. But I think part of this instinct to vilify other drivers stems not necessarily just from poor emotional regulation, but another cause that doesn't really get considered that often when it comes to how we view other motorists, at least in my opinion. And it's that, put simply, driving is kind of dehumanizing. These dangerous encounters that make headlines or end up in all those YouTube compilation videos of people throwing hands off the side of root bunch of numbers near lower garbage port likely don't happen without dehumanization reducing your inhibitions faster than a handle of Tito's. Dehumanization can encompass a wide variety of behaviors and actions, but I guess the simplest way of looking at it is that dehumanization is our minds denying humanity to somebody. We're refusing them the civility and dignity of being perceived as a person because it's easier to justify aggression against somebody who has no personhood. I mean, from our viewpoint, as drivers, they aren't people. We take their personhood and vest it into their car because we can't see their faces. We can't see that it's just a mom or it's a fresh faced teenager. It's almost like they exist as a concept rather than as an individual, if they can even be said to exist at all, because there is no person, there's just the car, there's just the action. Now, intellectually, our minds still recognize that they're human, but we've either started mentally comparing them to a non human pest or reduced them into a single function, like that guy's an addict, that guy's an illegal, or that guy is the piece of trash who took my spot in front of the donut shop. I always parked there. How do they not realize that spot belongs to me and nobody else? Now, dehumanization has been used as a method of explaining how certain atrocities over the course of history have happened. So, in that sense, concepts of dehumanization aren't entirely new. But here's the thing: neither is dehumanization on the road. A study from 1975, in which cars were sent out to deliberately provoke other motorists, found that the other drivers were more likely to behave aggressively when they couldn't see the instigator's face. Basically, the moral guardrails against harming others are no longer operating like they're supposed to, thereby making it even easier to treat your fellow man like subhuman garbage. However, a 2017 study on dehumanization indirectly pushes back on this notion by stating that while dehumanization makes instrumental violence more common, stuff like attacking people to gain compliance, money, resources, etc., it doesn't actually lead to an increase in moral violence. So, violence that's done because the person feels they're morally justified. Stuff like attacking as a form of punishment or justice, or any sort of retaliation that's framed as a corrective or moral action. Like, hey, I'm teaching this guy a lesson, or I'm making sure he can never hurt anybody again, like Batman type stuff. In these cases, the other party is still a person, but ironically, it's because they're still a person that they're deemed worthy of catching these hands, because you wronged me, and people aren't supposed to treat other people that way. So my solution is to treat you worse. It doesn't make sense. I didn't say it did. You can't prove I did. So with this study, because dehumanization didn't lead to an increase in these moral types of violence, you could argue that if dehumanization is a factor in road rage, it might not be as big of a factor as we might think. But then that's just one study. But I think it's useful for this context in that it draws a distinction that moral violence kind of feels like it's just an outcome from holding each other to a high standard. And in the context of driving, we expect other drivers to be better than they are. And so we feel ethically harmed when they aren't, even if we weren't physically harmed. And that brings me to the next part of the problem. Driving is the most collaborative thing we do as a society on most days, whether it's ceding ground to someone trying to merge, or taking the gap when somebody is giving us an opening, or zipper merging to maintain a steady flow of traffic, or letting others zipper merge rather than contributing to an ever expanding bottleneck so steep it'd make a giraffe ask for its phone number. But collaboration and cooperation aren't always the norm because bad drivers are taking over the road. Yet it's important to note that bad driving is a spectrum that encompasses a bunch of different behaviors. I'm not even talking about the instances where you're wondering how somebody even got their license in the first place because they don't seem to have any idea what they're doing. I'm talking bad drivers more in the sense of drivers who are careless or downright selfish on the road. Selfishness isn't just one guy blocking the left lane for miles or cutting in at the last second. It's texting because you feel like your message to your friend is more important than other drivers making it home safely. In that sense, you could argue that part of the issue is the act of driving itself. It's difficult to master if you're trying to do it competitively or in a specialized field, but in every other respect, it's kind of a low effort skill. And as a result, people feel like they don't need to sink the entirety of their attention into doing it safely. That's how you get people using their phone while driving, or doing that thing that I think they only ever do in movies because I've never seen anybody do it in real life, at least not in any car I've been in, but where they're having a conversation with somebody and they take their eyes off the road to look at the other person in the passenger seat, make eye contact with them because, hey, we're having a conversation. We need to make eye contact, apparently. But in movies, they take their eye off the road for way too long, and it just doesn't feel natural. I don't know that people do that in real life, but if they do, it's because driving is probably more of a low effort, low attention skill, at least in their mind, than something like, I don't know, walking in a huge crowd and trying to make sure you don't knock into anybody. I guess what I'm saying is that there's a lot of entitlement on the road, that I shouldn't have to use my turn signal. I shouldn't have to slow down for someone who's turning onto the road up ahead. The world should be expected to accommodate me, and I shouldn't have to pay any of the consequences. Rude drivers, careless drivers, the drivers who feel like they don't have to abide by the same laws that bind you. And in a lot of cases, it's understandable why entitlement takes root when you consider that aggressive driving behaviors are often rewarded. I mean, if I merge late, I'm probably going to get ahead of the person who decided to merge when they were supposed to. Tailgating on a one-lane back road means you'll pull over and let me pass, just to get me out of your hair. And at a certain point, all cooperative instinct is null and void because aggression works, so aggression wins. And as a result, these people feel like they can do 100 on the highway and bob and weave in and out of traffic and pass on the shoulder or turn left on a red light because they feel like it's taking too long, or hog the fast lane while they search Spotify for the next episode of whatever Manosphere podcast replaced their relationship with dad. And you just have to deal with it. These are the people instigating road rage, whether they realize it or not. And sometimes the rage they instigate gets deferred so that some other unfortunate driver ends up taking the brunt of the rage they didn't get to take out on the person who actually offended them, such as in the case of Lee Selwyn, the disc jockey and avid motorcyclist who, in 1988, was run off the road by a guy in a pickup truck who mistook him for some other guy who cut him off. In fact, people really seem to get triggered by being cut off. And so it's not surprising that it's one of the 5 major road rage triggers listed by author A.P. Nirenberg in his 1996 study on road rage. And I'm kind of disappointed in myself that it's taken me this long in the video to actually mention them, although in my defense, they're exactly the 5 triggers you'd expect. There's cutting in front without signaling. There's the perception that other drivers are slowing us down. There's other people not following the rules of the road. And then there's other people getting mad at us for perceived driving errors on our part. And finally, somebody taking a parking space we believe we had a claim to. Now, interestingly, none of the reasons are the other driver is just straight up bad at driving. Because bad driving, again, is a spectrum, and bad drivers come in all shapes and sizes. But I think road rage is a more complex issue than we can answer with bad drivers, since the person behind the wheel is only one part of the equation. Hey, so is it just me or are highway on ramps getting shorter? It's like road infrastructure has been engineered to be the little brother constantly in our face, talking about, I'm not touching you. It's like, okay, yeah, you're not doing anything wrong, but also you're making my life materially worse, and I'm telling mom anyway. And look, I'm totally open to the possibility that it's a failure of perception on my part, that maybe I'm just getting old and I'm perceiving things as being different from how they really are. But for instance, if we're filming a JDM car or an older vehicle with lower power figures, we either have to take the long way around to find a more generous on ramp so the car can get up to highway speeds, or we just have to avoid the highway altogether because we're not given enough road to actually get up to highway speeds. And in my experience, even when you're on the highway, lane drops feel more abrupt. Either signage or lettering doesn't communicate soon enough that the lane is ending, or the state hasn't maintained that signage or lettering so you don't really see it. And now you're having to cut somebody off, or somebody's cutting you off because they didn't know they had to merge until suddenly they ran out of road. And then there are stoplights that should have an arrow for protected turns but just don't, resulting in traffic backing up as people with a green light wait to be let through by opposing traffic. Driving now just feels like more of an assault on our patience than it ever has. A 2025 report by the AAA Foundation for Traffic Safety cited findings that suggested that triggers like traffic lights and posted speed limits added to driver stress in situations where drivers didn't feel that they were appropriate. Like the speed limit is 50, but it should really be 70 here, or something like that. All of these stressors on the road compound so that even in the best of times, otherwise calm people can lose their cool. But at a time when everything costs more and it feels like you have to work 3 times as hard to get even a third of what previous generations had, after a long day, it's enough to want to drive your head into the wall to find yourself stuck behind a slow moving driver at the world's most poorly timed stoplight. Stays green for 2.5 business seconds, and then it's race for the yellow light like it's the last chopper out of Nam. And at a deeper level, you could say that all of this irritation is just the price for having mobility, that the freedom and access that cars provide are only accessible through a system that essentially shackles us to cars. I talk about it in my video on commuting, link in the description, but cities are designed for cars, and so are the spaces in between those cities, so that even if we're not already predisposed to liking cars and wanting cars, we still need them to secure our place in society. But then, how much are the cars themselves actually to blame? Well, we all know the stereotype. The bigger the car, the bigger the jackass you have behind the wheel, because they probably feel invincible, so they think they shouldn't have to make room for other drivers. Other drivers should have to make room for them. And the 2025 AAA study did note that drivers felt more powerful and dominant in large trucks, sports cars, and even motorcycles, so I would imagine that could, in turn, contribute to more aggressive driving behaviors that risk escalating into road rage. But that AAA study, which surveyed focus groups totaling 53 motorists who've engaged in road rage behaviors themselves, found that there were prejudices against drivers based on the types of cars they encountered, so that even actions that aren't inherently hostile can be perceived that way if the other person just happens to be driving the wrong kind of car. As the study notes, quote, drivers easily stereotyped vehicles that they considered more aggressive, including trucks, motorcycles, and luxury and sports cars. Size was an important factor in perceptions of aggression. The bigness of trucks contributed to perceptions of aggression, as did the smallness of motorcycles. Noise was another important vehicle element, with louder engines associated with more aggression. Other vehicle elements participants highlighted included tinted windows, missing or paper license plates, and tricked out features. Interestingly, associations between vehicle characteristics and aggression could lead to judgments of other drivers' personality characteristics. In particular, participants associated driving a more aggressive vehicle with a sense of entitlement. End quote. I think what I find fascinating about this is how it kind of flies in the face of the theory of dehumanization, because if you're being frustrated by tinted windows, it implies that you want to be able to see the other driver, to imbue them with a greater sense of personhood as a way of sort of framing and justifying what could reasonably be classed as a sort of moral violence against them. But then, for all I know, it's just the fact that, maybe the light is hitting the tinted window in such a way that it's causing glare and really frustrating the drivers who responded to this survey. Either way, one participant in the survey stated that they think that drivers feel like they can do whatever they want if their car is expensive or even just looks expensive. It's like the privilege that luxury drivers feel for having a luxury car. While another rural participant in the survey found that drivers of heavy duty or super trucks tend to act like they own the road. And looking at it from that perspective, it's not really the cars, is it? I mean, yeah, you can blame the automakers for building cars that reinforce these perceptions by giving idiot drivers the platform to act like they're the main character of the open road, whether it's because their car is bigger, faster, or more luxurious than everybody else's. But hammers will find nails. If it isn't the car being too big, it'll be the car being too small for them to see it in their blind spot. If they don't like that a luxury car gives that driver a sense of entitlement, well, now it's that every driver has the same entitlement because everything is homogeneous and nobody's car is better than anybody else's. People will find faults that justify their outbursts every time. Because sometimes it's just life, man. Okay, so I don't have any studies for this one, but I feel like this is the one that might actually be at the heart of all of this. Because for every stressful encounter we have, we're one step closer to potentially snapping. And look, I get that it's different for everyone. Different people have different triggers, but sometimes that rage you feel towards the other driver isn't actually about the other driver. There is no such thing as the perfect driver because there's no such thing as the perfect person. I think I learned that from Hoobastank in 2004. Even the best driver in the world can get lost or get tired or be distracted. They can miss a turn. Maybe they have screaming kids in the back seat, or they're in an impromptu argument with their spouse that dredges up all the things left unsaid, and now they're fighting for their marriage on Interstate 81. Maybe they're rushing to the hospital or coming from a funeral, and all that sadness and stress and frustration and grief and suffering, all these things that are supposed to be private, manifest in a place where they're still very public because cars give a false sense of privacy, right? We think that because we're in our cabin, we're in our own private space, and in some ways we are. When you're at speed, nobody notices or cares that you're gesturing along with whatever song you're singing. Nobody sees or gives a damn that you're mining for nose gold or that ketchup and mustard from your lunch are all over your face and your shirt. Like, nobody sees that, nobody really cares. And generally speaking, unless you're stuck in traffic, I feel like most people never even look into another driver's cabin. But the truth is that, for better or worse, we're still in public. The open road is public. And now, whatever's going on in our lives has the potential to become somebody else's problem. We might try to control it, but we can't always do that. We're human. If you're close to the breaking point, you can try to self-regulate as best you can. But the factors stressing you out are still going to be there, so that somebody brake checking you can really be the thing that clips your last nerve. The load-bearing nerve holding your civility in place. And suddenly, you become that driver who's more Hyde than Jekyll. Now, enraged drivers still have a responsibility to themselves and to everybody else on the road to hold it together and not act on their worst impulses. But all I'm saying is that I get it. I understand why this happens, even if I'll never be able to understand how some people take it so far. How, even in the delirium of rage, they view a traffic infraction as something worth potentially taking a life over. Because ultimately, I think all of this is about empathy. I mean, really, this goes beyond emotional regulation or simply not dehumanizing people. It soars way past preconceived stereotypes of drivers based on their cars. And it bypasses the blame we assign to the roads we travel. It stretches past all of that and it lands on one simple, unifying question. Can you feel empathy for somebody who's pushing your buttons while they're doing something that pushes your buttons? And that's where I land for my conclusion, if I'm honest. The cause of road rage is empathy decay. And I don't even think it's intentional. I just think rage kind of overrides empathy sometimes. And for the most part, I feel like empathy is kind of an under-recognized component of driving, because getting past road rage requires having the capacity to see that not every inconsiderate action or inconvenience on the road is a dish cooked up especially for us. Which is not to say that the driver instigating you isn't to blame, that they didn't do anything that deserved your rage. But what I am saying is that the best response to a driver who provokes you is to simply not be them. Don't be like them. Don't provoke. Don't escalate. And I know, every person is different, and everybody has different bandwidths for dealing with this. But if you think you might be somebody who's susceptible to road rage, please talk to somebody. Take care of yourself, because it could be the difference between going nuts and just going home. But what do you think? What truly causes road rage? Have you ever given in to road rage? Have you ever been the victim of road rage? Tell me your stories in the comments. I'm reading them all. Be on the lookout for me. My screen name is Limited Time Roman. Like, comment, subscribe, share the video, tap that bell icon so you're notified for every new video, or join our Patreon for just $1 and support us to continue even making these videos. You'll get them early and ad-free along with other exclusive content you will never see here. Merch links are in the description, so definitely check those out. But all in all, thank you. Thank you so much for watching and for helping us to have a job. Have a tremendous rest of your week.